My HOA fined me $1,000 for having a non-compliant garden gnome. They thought their rulebook was a weapon to bully me, a way to flex their petty power. They didn't realize that I was about to use that same rulebook to systematically dismantle their entire kingdom, one petty, perfectly legal complaint at a time. My name is Arthur, and I'm a 62-year-old retired civil engineer. For 40 years, my job was to read dense, soul-crushingly dull technical documents, city codes, federal highway regulations, structural blueprints, and find the loopholes, the conflicts, the tiny overlooked sentences that could save a project millions or sink it entirely. I am, by trade and by temperament, a man who reads the fine print. This is a fact that my entitled HOA president, a woman named Olivia, should have considered before she decided to declare war on a 2-foot-tall piece of ceramic. My wife, Sarah, and I bought our home in the Westwood Estates 25 years ago. It was a quiet, pleasant neighborhood filled with young families. The HOA, back then, was a benign presence. They organized a yearly block party, maintained the communal flower beds, and their biggest act of authority was sending a polite reminder to bring in your trash cans. It was a community. But over the last decade, as the original families grew older and new ones moved in, a new breed of board member had taken over. They were less interested in community and more interested in control. At their head, their self-appointed queen, was Olivia. Olivia was a woman who seemed to derive her life's purpose from wielding the absolute, unquestionable power of the neighborhood covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&RS, our community's Bible of beige conformity. She had a way of speaking to you that was a masterclass in passive aggression, making you feel like an unruly toddler for even questioning her authority. We'd seen her in action before. She'd forced our neighbor, a single mom, to tear out a beautiful, professionally installed brick paver walkway because the bricks were half an inch wider than the approved style. She'd made a family take down a child's treehouse because it was visible from the street and disrupted the natural canopy. She was a tyrant of the trivial, a dictator of decorum. The gnome, for the record, was named Horatio. He was a gift from our daughter after a trip to England. A cheeky little fellow with a fishing rod, a pointy red hat, and a mischievous grin. Sarah, an avid gardener, had placed him in her prized rose garden, a little splash of whimsical color in a sea of perfectly manicured HOA-approved lawns. He was our tiny, silent rebellion against the creeping tide of beige that Olivia so cherished. For 2 years, Horatio fished peacefully amongst the roses, bothering no one. Until Olivia's annual Spring Beautification Walk, an event where she would patrol the neighborhood with a clipboard and a scowl, looking for infractions. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp white envelope with the HOA's self-important logo embossed at the top. It was a violation notice, unapproved lawn ornament. It declared in a severe, all-caps font that felt like it was shouting at you. It cited a vague bylaw about yard decorations, needing to be in harmony with the community's aesthetic. The fine was a staggering $1,000, payable within 30 days. I laughed at first. It was absurd. $1,000 for a gnome? This had to be a typo. Surely, they meant $10. I called the HOA management office, and after a tedious journey through a phone tree, was eventually put through to Olivia herself. Her voice was a syrupy mixture of condescending pity and triumphant smugness. "Arthur," she said, drawing out my name as if speaking to a child. "We've been getting complaints. The gnome is tacky. It's the kind of thing you see in a trailer park, not in Westwood Estates. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood. The rules are the rules. The fine is $1,000. Complaints? From who, Olivia? I asked, my amusement rapidly turning to a slow, burning anger. Horatio has been there for 2 years. He's practically a landmark. The little girl next door says good morning to him on her way to school. I'm not at liberty to disclose the source of the complaints, she said, a lie so blatant it was almost impressive. We both knew the complaint came from the woman on the phone, Pay the fine, Arthur, or it will start accruing interest and late fees. As you know, we can and we will put a lien on your house." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and felt a familiar switch flip deep in my brain. It was the same switch that would flip when a smug contractor would tell me a city ordinance was non-negotiable, right before I'd calmly show him the subsection that proved him disastrously wrong. Olivia had made a critical error. She hadn't just fined me. She'd given me a puzzle to solve. She had challenged me to a battle of wits, armed only with her ego and a vague, unenforceable bylaw. I, on the other hand, was about to bring the entire Library of Alexandria to a knife fight. That evening, I went to the HOA website and downloaded the full 287-page PDF of the Westwood Estates CC and RS, including all amendments dating back to 1988. I poured myself a large glass of iced tea, put on my reading glasses, and I began to read. Every single word. Sarah thought I was losing my mind. "Arthur, for heaven's sake, just move the gnome to the backyard," she pleaded, watching me print out the entire document. "It's not worth the fight. You know what she's like. She will make our lives miserable." "Sarah, my love," I said, already highlighting a particularly ambiguous section on fence heights. "This is no longer about the gnome. This is about principle. This is about a bully who has mistaken a retired civil engineer for a doormat. She has lit a fire, and I am going to warm my hands on it." It took me 3 full nights. The document was an absolute mess, a patchwork of decades of amendments, full of vague language, internal contradictions, and most importantly, clauses that had been completely and totally ignored by the residents and the board for years. It was a legal minefield, and Olivia had been tap dancing through it, assuming no one else had a map. I was the map maker. My first move was to appeal my own fine. I drafted a formal, certified letter. In it, I didn't argue about the gnome's aesthetic value. I argued from the text. I cited Section 9.4, which stated that any non-structural yard addition under 3 feet in height was considered de minimis and did not require prior board approval. Horatio, at a proud 2 feet, was safe. Then, I cited the complete lack of any definition, schedule, or appendix that clarified the phrase in harmony with the community's aesthetic, rendering the rule unenforceably vague under state law. I finished by respectfully requesting that the fine be rescinded immediately. This was the opening salvo. This was the polite warning shot across her bow. The board, which was really just Olivia and her 2 loyal, spineless cronies, denied my appeal. Their letter was curt and dismissive. The board's interpretation of the rules is final. It concluded. Fine. The time for politeness was over. It was time for malicious compliance. My spreadsheet now had a name. Operation Horatio's Revenge. It contained 78 documented, verifiable violations of the CC and RS, all clearly visible from public streets. Many of them were violations committed by Olivia and the other 2 board members, Barry and Linda. My campaign of pro-revenge began the next Monday. I decided to start slow, to build a little momentum. Phase 1, the mailboxes. The CC and RS, in an ancient and forgotten amendment from 1988, stated that all mailboxes must be a uniform black color, pole-mounted. Over the years, people had installed all sorts of novelty mailboxes. There were little white houses, decorative cast iron boxes, even a few painted bright, cheerful colors. Olivia's own mailbox was a fashionable, high-end bronze that was mounted in a brick pillar. A double violation. I filed a formal, anonymous complaint for every single non-compliant mailbox. 23 of them. The HOA was legally obligated to investigate and send out violation notices. The mass mailing of warnings went out a week later. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded in confusion and anger. Phase 2. The basketball hoops and play structures. Section 12.1 was crystal clear. No permanent or semi-permanent sporting or playground equipment shall be erected or maintained on any lot. Every single house with kids had a basketball hoop in the driveway. Board member Barry had an enormous one with a glass backboard. Board member Linda had a massive wooden swing set and slide in her side yard, clearly visible from the street. I filed 16 more complaints. 16 more letters went out. The penalty for this one was a $50 per day fine until the equipment was removed. Panic started to set in. People were now furious. Phase 3, the satellite dishes. An amendment from the late 90s, clearly written before the advent of modern small dishes, required any satellite dish to be screened from street view by approved landscape plantings. In the age of DirecTV and Dish Network, almost 24 homes had a small dish screwed to their roof. No one had approved landscape plantings on their roof. That included, once again, board member Barry. Another flurry of complaints went out. The fine was $250. The neighborhood was in a state of civil war. The Facebook page was a battlefield of angry comments. People were blaming the board, blaming each other. No one yet knew the source of the complaints. I, of course, remained silent, watching the beautiful chaos unfold from my study. Now, it was time for the main event. It was time for Olivia. I spent a Saturday morning with a notepad, a camera, and a laser measuring tool. Olivia, in her quest for curb appeal and to cement her status as the neighborhood queen bee, had made several significant and very expensive alterations to her property. First, her driveway. She'd had it redone 2 years prior with beautiful, imported stone pavers in a herringbone pattern. But Section 7.3 of the CC and RS explicitly stated all driveways must be poured concrete or asphalt. That was a 5-figure landscaping job. That was now in violation. Second, her fence. She had a lovely white picket fence around her front yard, a real showpiece. But a 1994 amendment I'd unearthed stated that all front yard fencing was prohibited. The original developer had wanted an open park-like feel. That rule had been ignored for so long, no one even knew it existed. But it was on the books. Third, and this was the masterpiece, the culmination of my engineering career, was her brand new, enormous, 3-car garage. When she'd built it 2 years ago, she had to get HOA approval, which, of course, she and her cronies granted themselves. But they had missed something. I drove down to the county records office and pulled the original master plat for our subdivision. Just as I suspected, there was a 10-foot wide public utility easement running right across the back 5 feet of her property. Nothing permanent can be built on an easement. Her garage, I measured it myself from the sidewalk, overhung that easement by 3.5 feet. I bundled my findings into 3 separate, meticulously detailed complaints, complete with photographic evidence, precise measurements, and citations of the exact page and line number of the CC and RS. I also included a copy of the county plat map. I sent them via certified mail. The reaction was swift and glorious. The management company, faced with undeniable, professionally documented proof of major violations, had no choice but to send Olivia the violation notices. She was now facing tens of thousands of dollars in fines and the potential of having to tear down her fence and, most devastatingly, a portion of her brand new garage. The next HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse. It was usually a sleepy affair with a handful of retirees. This time, the room was packed. It was standing room only. People were lined up along the walls. They were furious about their mailboxes, their basketball hoops, their satellite dishes, the sudden, tyrannical enforcement of rules no one had ever heard of. I let the chaos swell for a good 20 minutes, as person after person stood up to yell at Olivia, whose face was a frozen mask of rage. Then I stood up. "My name is Arthur Miller," I began, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the din. "I live at 124 Chestnut Drive, and I believe I can shed some light on the recent enforcement activities." The room went silent. All eyes were on me. I explained how I had received a $1,000 fine for a 2-foot-tall garden gnome. A collective gasp, then angry muttering, went through the room. The board, led by Ms. Olivia, denied my appeal. I continued, looking directly at her. They told me the board's interpretation of the rules was final. So, I took them at their word. I decided that, if the rules were going to be enforced, they should be enforced fully, fairly, and for everyone. I read the entire 287-page rulebook. And it turns out, we've all been violating the rules for years. The board just chose to ignore it, until it suited them to target one of their neighbors, over a piece of ceramic. I then laid out the violations I had found on Olivia's property, the driveway, the fence, and the illegal garage construction, over a public utility easement. The room was in an uproar. People were shouting at the board, demanding answers. This board has not been acting as a steward of our community, I said, my voice ringing with authority. It has been acting as a petty dictatorship. They have selectively enforced rules to harass residents, while ignoring their own, much larger, violations. This is not just mismanagement, it's a gross abuse of power. The meeting descended into beautiful, democratic chaos. A motion was made from the floor to hold an emergency vote of no confidence in the entire board. It passed with a near-unanimous roar of approval. Olivia and her cronies were voted out, right then and there. A new, temporary board was elected on the spot. My neighbor, a retired accountant named Bob, was voted the new president. The first official act of the new board was to rescind every single fine and violation notice that had been sent out in the past month, including mine. The second act was to form a committee, which I agreed to chair, to review and modernize the entire book of CC and RS, removing the outdated and contradictory rules. As for Olivia, the story doesn't end there. While the new HOA board dropped the complaints about her fence and driveway, the utility company was a different matter. They had been notified of the easement encroachment, anonymously, of course, and they do not take such things lightly. She was forced into a lengthy and expensive legal battle that ended with her having to pay to have the back wall of her garage demolished and rebuilt 3.5 feet shorter. The cost was astronomical, well into 6 figures. She put her house on the market 6 months later. The stress, the public humiliation, and the financial devastation were too much for her. I saw her on her moving day, directing the movers, her face a pinched, bitter scowl. She looked over and saw me, watering my wife's roses, right next to Horatio the gnome, who was still fishing peacefully. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just gave her a slow, deliberate nod. She had picked a fight with the wrong man. She thought she was just finding a tacky garden gnome. She ended up getting a masterclass in civil engineering, contract law, and the simple, beautiful art of malicious compliance.